Okay, so welcome everyone to Black Love. I don't know what this says about the state of Black Love. This is part of the Black British Lives Matter series of talks that are happening throughout the weekend, curated by me, Marcus Ryder, and building on the Black British Lives book co-edited with Lenny Henry. In this panel, we're going to be discussing Black love, from romantic love to familial love, from spiritual love to love of material possessions. We're going to be dissecting what Black love means. Can love be racialised? Is Black love in a racist society a revolutionary act? What is the difference between anti-racism and Black love? Can white people experience Black love? There is no doubt that Black love is definitely having a moment, with the New York Times running a Black love series, and Beyoncé's Black is King being interpreted by many people as an ode to Black love. To discuss all these issues and much, much more, we have an amazing panel. First, we have Chinonyerem Ombida, Nigerian British playwright, screenwriter and poet. Chino's work has been performed on BBC Radio 3, Radio 4, as well as numerous pieces for theatres, including the Young Vic and Hampstead Theatre. But possibly, and most importantly, for this session at least, she wrote the play Black Love, which premiered at the Kiln Theatre, London, earlier this year. People might know it as the Tricycle. Next, we have Chinonyerem, who has described Black love as, quote, a healthy redefinition of love by Black people, not just a racialised paradigm, end quote. She is a contributor for several international publications, including Harper's Bazaar, Global Citizen, Elle Magazine, Teen Vogue, and Independent. One of those pieces, which I'm sure we're going to discuss further, was titled, The Concept of Black Love Has Restored My Faith in Dating. So I'd like to explore that. And last, but definitely not least, we have author Derek Bardowell. He is the author of the sports memoir No Win Race, a Sunday Times and Financial Times Book of the Year in 2019, and the forthcoming book, although I think it's actually published now, isn't it?
25th of August.
It hasn't been published yet, okay. And the forthcoming book, Giving Back, How to Do Good Better, which reimagines philanthropy through a reparatory lens. And maybe we should, and we'll discuss it more, we should be reimagining giving back through a Black love lens. Okay, simple question to start off with. I'll open it up, but I'll start with you, Derek. What is Black love?
So thanks, Marcus, for having me on the panel. So when you asked me to be on the panel and you said Black love, the first thing that popped into my head, honestly, was like a political love. And what popped into my head was around the concept of revolutionary love and radical love, and the fact that so much of the Black liberation movements are based around this concept of Black love and centering love as a concept of how our world should operate and how it should be. So if you look at the works of Bell Hooks, or who called love a practice of freedom, of Angela Davis when she speaks about the abolition of prisons. It's not just the abolition of prisons. She speaks from the lens of what does a loving, centered society, one that's safe and secure, what does that look like? If you look at Claudia Jones, who pioneered the Notting Hill Carnival, so much of her practices was around joy as a form of resistance. And, you know, again, and Charlie Brinkhurst Cuff writes a lot about Claudia Jones. You're talking about this way of liberation that is really based and centered around love. But also, as we know, when you center love from that perspective, particularly from the perspective of Black women who historically have been, you know, acutely marginalized, you're talking about something that absolutely liberates everyone. So that's what I come back to. I come back to the Notting Hill Carnival, and I come back to the civil rights movement. I come back to liberation and Black love as something that liberates all. And that being Black love, that feels very central to me.
Okay. Tina, what does Black love mean to you?
Yeah, Marcus, thank you for having me on this panel. So lovely to be here. As you rightly said, for me, Black love has been a process of redefining that. I think, especially, I'm of a generation where I've seen different ways in which Black love has been portrayed. And for me personally, it's been about redefining that into a healthy perspective. Yes, talking about the political aspect that Derek kind of highlights on, and that's just because of the fact that even though love is universal for Black people, it's taking a lot to kind of reshape that because of our histories and our experiences and cultures as well. So I would simply just put Black love as a radical, intentional form of love in a healthy space for Black people.
Sheena, what is Black love to you?
I think Black love for me is about self-love. And I think that, if we understand that we can't give love to others until we love ourselves, then Black love starts with the self. And it feels important to say that in the context of how I think that self-love does then incorporate the political. It does then incorporate that radical understanding of yourself that is about accepting both what is healthy and what is unhealthy. So for me, Black love is kind of self-love with a deep amount of empathy and compassion for what we have as well learned and need to unlearn.
So is there unhealthy love?
There is definitely unhealthy self-love, or there is self-loathing.
Okay. So what is, I understand the concept of self-loathing, but what is unhealthy
self-love?
Self-love.
I think unhealthy self-love for me is when we have internalized so many of the messages about what we are as Black people that we sometimes fall into the trap of celebrating the fact that we have integrated, assimilated, and that being a thing that we are holding up as a trophy of ourselves, rather than going, who am I? Who am I really? And how do I validate that?
Okay. So, Derek, when you're talking about Black love being politicised, and we're talking about making sure that we don't celebrate or there's unhealthy love, right? Is Black love revolutionary?
It is revolutionary, but I think, speaking to Chino's point about the unhealthy self-love, and what my interpretation of that is, if you look at the place where Claudia Jones or Angela Davis comes from, it's centered in a very different way from a very masculine Black male conception of what love might look like. So the idea that I would say, for example, is that, like when I was a kid, as an example, use me as an example, Black love to me in terms of the political was very much wrapped in a conception of domination and of power, so I used to love, like a lot of rappers, not necessarily because of their skills on the mic, but to be really blatantly truthful, they just looked like they could beat down anyone from the National Front, so I used to love the fact that on a power level they had a certain strength that I really admired. The issue is that what they might be doing from a dominating perspective might also be detrimental to other Black people, and for me that unhealthy self-love, and that took me years to kind of understand and reconcile that just because I might like this particular person because they're dominating in a particular way, but they could be incredibly harmful to Black women, to other Black people in terms of how they project themselves. It can't be a type of love that says, oh, just because I get this from it, whatever harm and damage they're doing, that's okay. So for me, that's where I see that it can be revolutionary, but if it's really revolutionary and liberatory, then it has to be centered very different, and it would be centered a lot more through the conceptions of what, as I said, an Angela Davis or a Claudia Jones would conceive, more so than what we have perhaps traditionally grown up with.
Why are we using the term black love? Because what you just described there is, like in your rappers or whatever, more commonly we use terms like I'm a fan, you know, or I admire the person, or the person could be a role model. You don't normally hear it wrapped up in terms of love. And yet when we're talking on this panel now, we're using the term black love. How is what you're describing about you loving a rapper different from fandom? The
faith that we can have in people can really blind us. And I think, you know, going back to a conversation that we had earlier today, I was working at the Voice newspaper many years ago when Mike Tyson came to Brixton. And when Mike Tyson came to Brixton, it was like Muhammad Ali coming to the UK in the 1960s, or, you know, he was revered on a level that was unbelievable. He brought the place to a standstill. Now, that wasn't the case of, I don't know whether you could even have a Jay-Z that would come in, or whoever that would come in and have that level of adoration. The feelings that there was for Mike Tyson, that was love. But then we also know Mike Tyson's history beyond what he's done in the ring. And there's an unhealthiness to it. But that love where we are so blinded by that person's position and their conception of blackness, that for me can be where that unhealthiness comes from. And when I say love, you know, and I say this because I used to work in prisons as well, and used to have conversations about how, you know, the people that I worked with adored some rappers above and beyond. They used to live their lives through rappers and through this. It's a particular type of love to me that goes beyond the logical. And I'm not saying that white people don't do that as well, and other people, you know, but I am saying that there is a specific type of unhealthiness in some of this that I think Chino touches on.
Tina, you've written about romantic love, which I'm going to come on to. But even in romantic love, black love, is there an element of revolution about that? Would you cast it in or frame it in the same way that Derek and Chino are framing it?
Yeah, I think we tend to think of love in a sense of a romantic relations, but this idea spans beyond just romantic relationships. It spans into the idea of sisterhood. It spans into a realm of mother-daughter relationships. It stems into a realm of father-son relationship. And these are the structures that have been severely broken down by our systems, by our histories. And that is what makes the term revolutionary. Just because, like I said in the piece, there's a part when I say, and I did something similar on Black Joy as well. And as someone who really has a more globalist perspective, and also international development perspective, just because I see everything as a universal thing, more so than just racialized, I often find it hard to pen these things. Because I'm like, I don't really want to be writing something about, oh, black joy or black love. But when you look deep into it, if you want to look at society, you can't really talk about these things without addressing the fracture. You know, it's like having a sick person go to the hospital. You really need to diagnose where these issues are coming from. And a lot of the time they're coming from unhealthy places. And it goes back to your question, your idea, Derek, on rappers. These are unhealthy ideas which have been absorbed, believed, and sometimes being perpetuated and kind of even, you know, evangelized. That a lot of people are growing up with, a lot of people are believing and living their lives by. So essentially, if you want to introduce different ideas, it becomes revolutionary just because a lot of the time people are not used to it. And another area of this as well is that people don't even realize it's a problem as well, just because you'll think, oh, but I mean, culturally, if you have black people within a community, they're most likely to date each other, or it's supposed to be a normal thing, but it actually isn't a normal thing. So then when you start having these discussions, that's when you have a revolutionary idea and an idea that is seen as, you know, so different, when actually it's very simple and just needs to be revised.
So I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly in the first part of your answer. What I'm hearing is due to, because you're saying that there are certain things in our history and what have you. Let me try and break down what that really means explicitly. So during slavery, the idea of fathers being able to be with their children, the idea of men and women being able to have a secure relationship and being together was systematically broken down. Yeah. So, and within colonialism, the fracture of certain relationships was systematically broken down. And so what I think I'm hearing is celebrating and repairing those relationships in a loving way is addressing the very history. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, certainly. It's addressing the historic kind of damages, but also providing healing. You know, just because I feel like in order to address it, there is an element of healing that is needed. Whether it's with the parents, whether it's with just how we perceive relationship and love.
Okay. All right. And you've talked about that and in terms of dating. So can you explain a little bit with regards to, because dating is often just seen as a trivial matter, right? So can you explain a little bit? And I think the idea of revolutionary dating seems like an oxymoron, right? So I'd be curious as to how you might be able to marry those two things.
Yeah, dating is essentially very trivial until you realize that relationships and relationships are what pretty much form the foundation of what society, civilization. And if you're having young women who are being traumatized through their dating experiences, what are the women, what are the guys, who are these people do you have in society? So with the dating aspect, I was using dating as a lens to look at society in general. The belief that, I know for example, several of my friends, especially women who just are not doing dating again. It's like, they're like, yeah, we're good. We're not gonna go into the whole idea. And even men as well, who are literally stuck with the idea that, you know what, I'm not gonna really do anything relationship-wise, you know. And while everyone has the autonomy to decide how they want to live their lives romantically, we need to look at the consequences. Because if we're looking at the history of the structures that have been broken, we need to look at the future as well. And that's what a lot of my work does. I like to look at how these issues would affect us in the future, you know? And I just find that the only way in which we marry these two is look at what's happened previously, prior to the situation now, and what is gonna happen in the future. And the idea is that if we don't restore it, we're gonna have the same patterns continue to kind of evolve and create more issues with the young people or the children that we're bringing into the world and how they connect. And even just the future of how the community, the black community looks like, you know. Talks about self-love, having young people or children grow up in environments where they can't even imagine what it looks like to see black love, or to see holistic forms of black people dating, or to see holistic forms of sisterhood. And that becomes a problem that makes it more than just trivial.
Okay, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of interracial relationships. So I'm just going to ask one question to all three of you, and then I'm going to move on, because I'm sure there could be numerous panels, and there's always numerous discussions about interracial relationships, right? But according to the last census, 2011, if you look at black Caribbean men, almost 50%, 48% are not in relationships with black women. Robert Beckford was on a panel and he cited that the current figure is closer to 60 to 70%. Right? Is this indicative of a problem with black love? Should we not boil it down to the individual? Is it wrong to extrapolate the individual to, if we see dating or if we see relationships as being part of black love, do those stats say anything about black love? And they might not. So I'll start with Derek and work our way down.
I think there is a question of validation that's wrapped up in that. I would say from a very personal perspective, there is something quite political for me in terms of love. So that is important in terms of any conception of romantic love, which might sound a bit dry and sound like, if I was on a dating app, I would want people to, I don't know, write a thesis or something like that. And I don't mean it in that sense, but there is something that...
I know your wife and I think she probably could.
Yeah, no, it's true. But there is something that that's very meaningful for me personally. So I can't speak to other people's experiences, but there is definitely part of our experience as black British, particularly as people that are second generation black people and ongoing generations, that seeks lots of validation in the work that we do, the lives that we have, and that can be as much in, if you're working in academia and what you need validity for, as much as relationships as well. So I do think that's wrapped up in all of that. And then I think to an earlier point that Chino said, there is also a lot that's wrapped up in sort of internalized racism and self-love or lack of self-love that might exist, that says, and I've had black men that have said this to me face to face, I think it will be easier if I'm with a white woman in terms of getting through in this society. And that's not me saying that as an opinion. That's black men that have said this to me in terms of the relationships that they've had.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. It's a part of the self-loathing, self-hatred aspect that Shino mentioned, but it is also part of what I was saying in regards to what do you want the future to look like, and that's exactly where we're heading towards, in a sense, because I think it's more than just people feeling that they can get far ahead in life, but actually really believing internally that this idea of love maybe between just another black person, I don't think it could work. And it's actually an ideology, it's actually something that a lot of people have built up in their minds, and it can come from different places of just maybe not even seeing anything like it, or just not internally believing it could work. But then how do we change these things? I know I wrote a piece on colorism, and I shared my experience of growing up and being bullied as a young, dark girl. And a lot of the time, the people who were doing the bullying were also black people. It was lighter skin black people who at that time were educated to think that they were better looking. And there were a lot of guys who kind of fed into the ideas as well. So yeah, we're now living in a different world where, I can be on panels like this, I can be doing what I do, and, we're creating different spaces for dark women, right? But these ideas still exist. There are several people out there who still hold these views and have a colorist ideas that has fed into love, that has fed into the family institutions that exist in broad daylight, and they just have to be challenged in order to kind of be addressed.
Yeah. Sheila.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think that one of the difficulties I have always had around even the words black love is that it immediately seems to cancel other things. And I don't understand why that is, why it has to be in opposition to other things. Because black love for me is in no way denying anyone else. It's simply about an opportunity to have open, honest self-conversations, but conversations with other people about what does it mean when you live in a society and in a world where everything around you tells you not to value yourself. And then, so those statistics to me just speak to a world that has told, on the majority, black men not to value themselves and then equally not to value black women. I mean, there's some words that I sort of feel like I can't exist with. Joy, which you mentioned, is a big part of that. And the joy that I feel like I'm trying to find in my experience of being a black woman, is the thing that statistic sometimes feels like it's not speaking to, where I've never, most of us, majority of my generation have never grown up, apart from Naomi Campbell, and even Naomi Campbell, for pretty much her entire career was told she couldn't be on the cover of Vogue magazine because no one would buy it, right? And this was a given that the most famous black model in the world could not be on the front cover, even of UK Vogue, because no one would buy it, right? So that's the reality of what, as black women, and I think the colorism thing absolutely comes into it. And so for me, all that statistic says is there is a narrative that if people want to feed into that, that's absolutely fine. But there are still young black girls growing up in this country that don't see images of healthy, adoring, the current phrase is, black women living the soft life. And the soft life is appearing in romantic novels and, that's the soft life, is appearing in adverts about, a group of friends going on holiday and all jumping into the pool at the same time and drinking cocktails.
So, from what I understand, right, so correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that black love in and of itself should not be defined in opposition to other love, that you can have, so if we're talking about this particular aspect, right, you can have a love for a black partner, but that doesn't negate a interracial relationship love, or you can love, to use Derek's example, some types of black music, but that doesn't mean if somebody who also loves, Kate Bush right now, that doesn't negate other forms of love of black artists or whatever. Is that? I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, because I think one of the painful things that I have to say is that, like you, Derek, the play that I wrote came out from an experience I had in a supermarket in South London, where I walked into a supermarket innocently, and there were two black men. One was the kind of security guard, and one was working on the shop floor, and they were having a conversation about black women, and I could not believe what I was hearing. Like, it was so derogatory, it was so painful and so harmful. And I thought, I don't even mind that obviously you're saying you prefer to date outside of blackness, but you're attacking me and women who look like me in order to make that choice. That's the problem.
Right, so the difference between push factors and pull factors.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here's the confession. I was originally not going to chair this panel, but the person I asked to chair it felt uncomfortable because they are with a white partner. I think that person would have, and I'm really trying not to use any gendered terms here, right? No pronouns. But I think that person would have been a great chair. What message, and I'll start with you, Chino, would you have? They're not here, so you can say it. What message would you have for that person?
My God, I just, like I am a soft, one of the things, radical, revolutionary things that I'm doing in my life at the moment as a woman of a certain age is really starting to redefine myself for myself, right? I am an incredibly soft human being, and so something like that just makes me feel really sad. Like I can feel bits of my heart breaking. Again, that in order to feel engaged with Black love, or that somehow that term feels like something to shy away from, because we live in a white country. I mean, I don't know, like we were having this conversation over breakfast, but like the same queen is the same queen. Do you see what I mean? That is now, so like, I'm not trying to, we all engage with white people, we all love white people, we all in some ways have been supported, have been loved, have been cared for by white people, but the structure of whiteness is sometimes the thing that we're talking about, not individuals. And so, the idea that you see a panel called Black Love and it makes you feel like you can't engage with that because you love you're in a loving relation, that just makes me, like I literally am holding back tears, because it's absolutely the reason why this conversation still can't happen, and it needs to happen, because are we saying that internalized racism isn't real? Are we saying that we haven't all swallowed some aspects of some of this stuff? Because I think I've swallowed some of it, and I wasn't even born here.
Tina, what would you say to the person who felt that they couldn't chair this panel?
I mean, that's not quite the point. That's not the idea at all. I feel like having these conversations are essential, and not being able to kind of face it is one of the issues that we have. The ability to be able to come together and speak on things like this is the only way in which we can open up the table of conversation. It's not only around the issue of like Black love, but all the difficult conversations that we're having that all of us needs to get involved with. It's really good. I know there's not so many people here, but just being able to even look around here and just looking at, different people here. These are the spaces we need to create. These are the spaces I'm just really passionate about being in the first place. The fact that, there are people sat here who are not Black, who are listening to a panel on Black love. But that is the barriers and the ways in which we need to kind of engage with issues in our society in order to be better at addressing them, because it involves all of us, So I think as a Black person to say that's not quite the point. You've got it all wrong there, and we need to get better at addressing some of even the tough conversations that need to be had. We can't just continue sweeping it under the carpet.
Right. Derek, I want to ask, unless you really want to, you've got a strong opinion, I could move on?
Yeah.
Right. When we spoke before, you've already revealed that obviously I asked you and we had a discussion before this panel, right? You talked about wanting to talk about Caribbean love in particular. Now I think I'm right. Caribbean heritage, African heritage, Caribbean heritage. We often use Black as a cover-all term. Is there a difference between Caribbean love and African love? Because you were talking about Caribbean love when we spoke.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that as a question, but I grew up with a very positive conception of love. My mum and dad are coming up to 59 years of marriage this
They're not
year.
even here, and I want to applaud now.
And they met in Galena in St. Mary in Jamaica, and my dad was as a teenager was lived on his own without running water, electricity or anything in his house. And my mum used to as a teenager cycle up to the Goldeneye estate where C. Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books, you know, she used to deliver groceries, and he, you know, my dad came over first and used to correspond with my mum, and then my mum came over a year or two later, and they got married, and, you know, they together have been together for a long time, and they are part of the Windrush generation, and which means that they've been in Britain longer than they were in Jamaica, and pretty much their experience in this country has been one of hostility, pretty much all the way through, you know, from the various acts that have stopped the flow of people coming over from the Caribbean, even though we built up the NHS and so much of the infrastructure in this country, through to the ways in which myself, you know, being stopped and searched by the police, and my experiences growing up have gone through all of that. And the thing that always strikes me in terms of that conception of that experience and that particular experience is one of safety and security, because the big thing that my mum and dad always provided was that safety and security from the hostility of everything that was going around. I think too was the openness that they have, which was very similar to a number of their friends and others from the Caribbean community. An openness to other people coming into our house and being able to embrace others from different spaces and places, even if it was at odds with their experiences and stuff. They just were able to extend that safety and security. And then I think the third thing for me was just the joy bit. It's like, when I go up to my mum and dad's place, we have jokes, right? And we have political conversations, but we have jokes. So isn't this story for me of, we have the safety and security against the hell of oppression and against this and that. There is that, yes, but there is also an element of, I will go to their house and we will have really healthy debate about politics and everything like that, but at the same time we will be cracking jokes, winding people up and all of this stuff. So there is something about their experience to me, and what they have done for each other, for us, but also for our community, my friends when they were chucked out of their houses, or, you know, partners that we've brought home that, you know, my mum and dad, I'm sure at some point would have probably thought, you know, they just embraced in a way that I think was very unique to their experience. And again, I come back to, you know, Claudia Jones and pioneering the carnival and joyous resistance and things of that nature. The fact that there is something about the hybridity of Caribbean people or people that came over here, or that experience, that I think lends itself to being able to embrace people and others in a very unique way.
Because, I mean, that reminds me in that I feel that I experienced, and this will be might be a contradiction in terms, when I went back to Jamaica, and my mother would take me back to Jamaica quite regularly from the age of 5, most summers, and I experienced through a loving family, I experienced a non-racialized blackness. I know it sounds like a contradiction, but it was a loving black family and a way of being black, which didn't mean I had to listen to rap music, although I did love rap music. I didn't have to dance in a certain way. I didn't have to be good at sport, although I just like to say I was good at sport, people. But it was a non-racialized blackness, which was really liberating through...
Well, it wasn't the pressure. So I remember going to Jamaica and trying to be like, for the first time, I cannot tell you what I looked like, but I just tried to be super Jamaican when I went to Jamaica, because I had this conception of what I should be. And I went there and just realized as soon as I stepped off the plane and heard the guys that were trying to take my luggage going, English, and realizing,
You can't- you can't be
I'm not, I can't, you know. And after kind of shedding that facade, that was not a kind of sense of belonging that I was Jamaican and stuff. And it wasn't that sense of, I belong more to Jamaica than I do to England or anything like that. I was still working that out. It was just an ease. It was just an ease that I didn't have to worry about the color of my skin. And because, you know, I grew up in Newham in the East End. So from the age of 7 or 8 or 9 years of age, I was politicized from that point because I was being stopped and searched by the police at that point. I was having conflict with teachers by that point. I was questioning my color of my skin and that conception of what's more important, shared experiences or a shared birthplace, at an age that I wasn't able to absorb any of that. So to actually just go to a country and shed all of that, that was a beautiful, beautiful thing, even if, you know, I didn't belong in many other ways.
Tina and Chino, in terms of, you were born in Nigeria, and Tina, you were born here? Or
No, I was born in Ghana, but
you
grew
were born
up
in
here.
Ghana?
Yeah.
And so, do you think there's a different conception of black love in Ghana and Nigeria than, or maybe it's just love? Is black love only in the diaspora, and is it just love back in Africa, or how do you both view that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just love. I mean, it's just love, right? It's just all the things that, I mean, I found it really strange having to redefine myself, because even though I was young when we moved here, I think I had quite a strong sense of self and the world, because I was born not long after the Biafran War. And so my parents, who were themselves quite young, had been through one of the most horrific civil wars ever. I mean, and so had seen starvation and literally, sorry to be graphic, but I feel I have to be, like, you know, babies dying on the side of the street. And when you see that when you're 17 or 18, of course it's going to change your relationship to politics. So from before I could even walk, I was being told certain things about our colonial history, about, you know, about slavery. My dad, I mean, just to kind of say the sort of weird person he is, built himself, you know, compounds in Nigeria, like, you know, a family has a compound and there's lots of different buildings, and you know, you might move your mother-in-law into one of the buildings, and then you might keep one for the your first wife, and then another second wife. And right bang in the middle of his compound, he built himself a one-man house. where he could, it was like the ultimate man shed, do you know what I mean? And the door is carved with the history of the slave trade. That's the kind of, that was who was like talking in my ear in my formative years. So even by the time I came into this idea that I was another, and that there was this difference, and that there was this thing that I was in opposition to, I feel like I had such a strong sense of who I was, and really, and just like before, I'm sure you've got some really interesting things to say from moving from Ghana. The two countries are right next to each other, very, very different. Yeah. But is that I only became an artist when I remembered that little girl. Like, that's for me was the moment I realized I could be an artist, that I could tell stories. Because actually those first 7 years, that 7-year-old girl is what fuels quite a lot of my work. Because I remember being free, and being free of being opposed to any other thing, and being free to imagine, and being so close to nature that the idea that I'm not close to nature, which is such a big part of the narrative here, seems odd because I've always been close to nature. So it's all those things that you start to kind of go, yeah, I don't know. For me, it's really difficult to imagine that I say love is love, but unfortunately we have to put the black before it in this context.
Tina, is black love a diasporan idea, or does black love exist in black majority countries as well?
Yeah, so I actually went to primary school here, from nursery onwards, and I visited Ghana. But last year was the only time where I'd actually spent a large amount of time as an adult in Ghana. And during the pandemic, I moved there to work remotely, and honestly, it was the most eye-opening thing ever. Just because while you're here, there's a lot of conversations you follow on social media and within diaspora, but it's actually not quite like that at all. And while you have a phenomenon now where a lot of people, especially with Ghana, there's a lot of people moving back. It's like everyone, the tables have turned, people are going back. I actually was inspired to write that piece after my year in Ghana and moving back and experiencing what diasporans are experiencing there and what people are doing. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing, sadly. You have these issues going on that even perpetuated even more by the history of colonization, by the history of poverty, by the history of gaps that are being created between locals who live there and diasporans who are moving back, who have more money now to go around and flex and treat women horribly and have women who are now even more vulnerable than ever. So these issues, I feel like that in itself needs a whole panel in itself, because the issue and experience within diaspora and the issue and experience between being a black person in Africa and here, they're all different experiences that unless you have an opportunity to be there and experience, you won't quite understand. And I tell people now, it's really not social media at all. We need to come off social media and actually experience these things for what it is. Because then you actually see what the problems are. The older generation have created problems that they hide. I mean, my grandparents were married for 60 years. So like you, I've seen what these relationships look like, and especially my granddad was a chief. He married 6 wives and stuff. But these are all still problems that generationally live on. I even look at my parents now. I tell you, my mom is a single parent, looking at chains of broken relationships that people that have had to go through. And now looking at our generation, where I know friends and males. We talked about colorism, who actually have these ideas. They go back to countries like Ghana, where you have signboards of lighter skinned women who are doing adverts on creams that are used to bleach skin and doing music videos of what it is to be beautiful. You have to be light skinned. You have to have this shaped body. That is the issues that exist, and that kind of, it's very hidden and very underneath the microscope, but it's all there, and when you're there, you're just this is a problem. This is a problem.
No. The idea that I feel that there is self-healing. The history of slavery and colonialism is global.
It's global.
And so the need of black love, or the relevance of black love, is relevant
Globally.
Yeah. We haven't got that many people in the audience, but people might have questions. I've got lots of questions if other people... Oh, we have a question.
Lots of you have spoken about healing and self-love. I want to know what that looks like as a daily practice, how you're unlearning things, how you're breaking down things that you've internalized, negative things that you've internalized. What does that look like in everyday practice?
I'm okay to say now that I'm an old woman, right? So I think I'm okay to say that now. But I think healing is such a big word for me, and I use healing even in the context of quite institutional conversations sometimes, which really annoys people because it's not a word you can quantify or you can, but for me, the practice of self-love and healing looks like educating myself, and particularly around the shoulders that I stand on. I feel like I really need to honour the knowledge that came before me, and I'm seeing in the audience, and I'm like, oh my God, she's listening to me talking, you know. But like, and there's lots of women from the global majority particularly, who when I meet them, healing for me is that joyful moment when you meet someone that you really admire, whose books you've read, or whose words you've seen, or whose energy you carry, and then you meet them and you're like, you know, and that is healing. That is part of my self-love, is because I'm honouring, seeing myself, seeing some bits of what I want in life in another person. Do you see what I mean? Honouring the body is really important for black women.
Yeah.
We don't honour our bodies enough, and the reason why I say that is because I was also very good at sports, Marcus, when I was young, and played numerous sports. Did GCSE sports studies. I was mad at it, but I felt really conscious as a black girl that if I carried on with this, what felt like at times androgynous way of being, that I would be, I got stopped by police quite a bit because I used to wear a cap. If I wear a cap today, I still get stopped by police. Like, that's a really interesting thing. But honouring physically the space we take up, honouring the ways in which we want to present ourselves, asking yourself, like, how do I want to present myself? Not how's the world going to respond to me if I do this, or, you know, but how do I want to do that? So the physical aspect of being on the planet and being on this particular bit of the planet is quite important to me at the moment as a daily practice. But yeah, reading, poetry, and just to say out loud, one of the things in the play that I created was the mythical space. The mythical space for me is a space for healing. Like, I feel that where my imaginative power can take me is always a really interesting thing. So that's where I find a lot of self-love. Like, you know, whether that's imagining myself for a day as a hero, like I'm a hero, I'm coming out to save people today. Do you know what I mean? Oh no, today I'm an angel, I'm floating like a butterfly, I'm just doing, you know, I'm just doing light stuff. Oh, today I'm living the soft life, and I go into a cafe and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to have an Aperol, you know, just in the middle of the day, just because this is the, you know, like, just, I think honouring all wholeness. Yeah. One of the things that we're stripped of is wholeness. One of the things that I think Black Love is about is wholeness. And that's why I was talking about not just the positive, but like, honour the wholeness of who you are. If you find yourself doing something or responding a certain way because that's a taught behaviour or an internalised bit of racism, how do I, with empathy for myself, go, oh, Chino, do you see what I mean? Stop yourself, let's start again. And all of that for me is what that healing starts to look like, you know, and conversation. Like, I don't know, it feels like there's the difficult conversations, the harder conversations to have, obviously. It's really hard conversations to have when you're talking to another black person. Sorry, that went on, but I'm mad about all this stuff at the moment.
Tina.
Yeah, the healing is deep. I was trying to remember a Netflix series I watched. I just don't remember, but it talked about women across generation, and just like seeing just how internally you're talking about the body, but a lot of times, a lot of these things are embedded within the body. You know, we talk about like women at certain ages losing their hair, and you know, losing hair, just having illnesses, and like so many illnesses in black women. But I think it really comes from education, number one, really, really being aware of these things. Knowing that it ends with you definitely has been something that we need to kind of be active on, knowing that we can create different patterns. And that's my cool thing. That is the revolution that comes into Black Love. And that is why I wrote that, because I wanted someone to pick up something and read and say, hey, like, I have faith in this. And that came from hearing so many people saying, I actually don't even believe in this anymore, you know? And really being able to envision a different future where we can enjoy all these aspects of things that we're created to be enjoyed, you know, not the easiest, but we can create healthy ways in order to embrace and live full lives. You don't want to be a black person and only settle for this part of the cake just because of your color. You want to be a full version of yourself, embracing healing, embracing life in every aspect of it, no matter where you are.
Derek.
Why?
Little brief, because I've got one more question.
Yeah, I would say that I'm still a work in progress in terms of, like, if you're talking about a daily practice, I'm kind of old, and so I still have, like, that thing of you need to work twice as hard, and I feel guilty if I'm not working. And so I learn a lot from younger people. So I did a session recently with an organisation called Healing Justice London, and we did a somatic session. And for me, there was something that we were doing that was around, they kind of, as humans, there was like loads of us in the room, and they stood in front of me. And then they started moving around, and they were saying to me, you know, Derek, you know, do you feel comfortable with people being to the side of you, people being this side? And eventually they were in front of me, and just a couple of feet in front of me. And it was probably the first time in any kind of work context that I'd felt shielded, and just physically seeing that just kind of broke me down, because I was just like, oh my God, I spend so much time doing
putting
panels.
Up your own
yeah,
defenses.
you know, we're doing panels all of the time, and because you spend so many years kind of putting on a facade a lot of the time, and a shield to be able to just get through the day, you don't actually do anything to heal. You're not actually, so you're not shedding anything during the course of the day. You're just harboring, and being in that situation at that time, for like the first time, just got me to really shed, you know. So even though I read, and a lot of my healing and joy comes through reading, and through dialogue with lots of people, actually that was the first time sort of physically that I connected my body and what was going on with what was going on mentally. I think a lot of the healing that I do tends to be quite mental, but it doesn't really connect to the body. So yeah, I'm a work in progress.
Okay, I'm really sorry, those bells were basically saying that we've run out of time. So I won't be able to take your question, but I'm sure that the panelists will be able to answer.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Yeah.
So I would just like to say thank you very much, Derek, Tina, Chino. It's been absolutely healing for me to explore ideas of black love. And I will now go away and find ways to heal. Thank you very much.